Hello, Vanakkam. My name is Sara Mikolai and I'm an artist, a dancer and choreographer. Thank you, Kälam Art Space Jaffna and Goethe Institute Sri Lanka for inviting me to take part in this digital talk series for Kälam Art Space. I'm particularly happy and feel honored about this invitation from Jaffna. What tradition and heritage means to me and how I work with it in my practice and in my work as an artist. And I want to thank Nicholas first of all for phrasing the question in this way, because it tells me that there is a relationship going on, a relationship between a tradition and a person. And a relationship for me is something that is very much alive. And more than anything, it needs people to stay alive, right? And my work is actually precisely a lot about this, about staying in conversation about what it is that we call tradition and what it means to me today. This is actually precisely the content of my work, and I unpack it in each of my works in a bit of a different way, dealing with slightly different things and also taking things from one work into the next. And like I've said, it's very much an ongoing conversation for me, an ongoing dialogue, which I have in my solo practice as an artist, through both practical but also theoretical research and looking at documentation from the past, but also lived realities of today's world and time. And I do it as well with people and colleagues who have maybe similar but also different questions. And it is really something that doesn't really have one answer, and I also don't think it has a definite and ultimate answer. It is really an ongoing thing, and it is definitely not a one person's job. It is definitely something to stay in dialogue with people, and I think there are many people who are dealing with this question. And I think in today's world, in which this idea of modernity, progress is questioned a lot, because it is an idea that is born out of colonial times and very much an idea that which capitalism is very much benefiting from. I think it is a very beautiful time to observe many people dealing in different ways with passed on knowledge, traditions, in various ways and negotiating. And this is, I think, very much something that I keep on doing. It is a reflection process where I'm asking questions to a past and to a present, in a both in a critical and in an open way. And it is really important for me to stay alert and ask myself the same questions, to so that the criticality is not only towards something or someone else, but also towards myself as an artist. And this requires quite a blunt honesty, and it requires to be open to try things out, to explore, to feel like something good is coming out, but also to failure or mistakes. And yeah, this is like a small summary to begin And so if tradition is something that is being passed on to you, I want to begin with the people who have been, in the most immediate sense, passing on knowledge and practices and ideas on to me, my parents. My mother, she was born in Battikulua, Matakalapu, in the east of Sri Lanka, and her family has been moving throughout her entire childhood, actually, between Battikulua, Kandy, Jaffna, and ultimately Colombo. And she has been from very early age on fascinated with dance and the energy and the power of dance, expressing an inner world through the body, but also being also learning about the body and the relationship to the outer world and the inner world. Yeah, and so the first classes she's had were in her school. As a school subject, she took Bharatanatyam and equally Kandyan dance. Both of them were school subjects, very much available. And then she, the more fascinated she's become with the dance, she learned in Jaffna from her cousin Srimati Devamalar Sundar, who has been learning Bharatanatyam from Adya Lakshman and the Adya Lakshman lineage. And then her second teacher was Srimati Kamala Jnanadas in Betikulua, who also comes from the Adya Lakshman tradition. And of course, we know in the 80s, Sri Lanka went through a very difficult time during the war, and she was one of many who migrated. She migrated to Germany, and Berlin. It was there where she continued this practice as a dancer and as a dance teacher, and she built a school, Abhinaya Darpanapalli, which she directs until today. This building this school, it took effort and energy, but it was filled with joy. And when I say effort, it was because building a school in a place where you're also arriving to a country which might not necessarily be yet ready to embrace other cultures, and this is something that Germany is dealing with, and something that until today Germany is dealing with, and the Western world is dealing with, and we see this in particular in the movements that are happening currently. And of course my mother has been very much affected by that, and she's been doing, I think, a remarkable job in building the school in very marginal spaces, and making this dance accessible for the community and for the generations to come. And I was the first generation, one of the first generations to be born and raised in Berlin or abroad. And for me, this dance school was, in a way, it felt like home. And I don't really mean it in a super cheesy way. It really felt like this as a girl, as a young girl. It is where I had my closest friends. It is where I felt the most comfortable. It is where I felt that what we were doing, creating this space, a collective space of song and dance, felt extremely empowering. And it was very important for my mother to to keep this space as a space of song and dance, equally for each person, no matter what background. So we've had people, mostly of course from the Sri Lankan Tamil community, but we've also had people from other backgrounds. Yeah, that openness while having to also fight to maintain that space, I think, is something that is a remarkable job. And the community there are many figures in the community who have been providing the next generations with different forms of classes and different subjects, if it's language or sangidam, dance, mridangam, and so it's like so yeah, it's like it was very important to keep this culture alive. And I think that this is also slightly changing, and it is changing with the different needs of the different generations. My father, who is German, is a musician, a pianist, and he comes from a very different lineage, from a different perspective on music and artistic practices. He's been in the 80s exploring the underground scene of Berlin, very much as what I would call an ambient and experimental musician, and very much a mind who was extremely curious to explore the possibilities of sound and the possibilities of music in a very abstract way. And yeah, it is of course quite special to have these very curious and particular characters, both as my parents, which comes with a lot of joy and a lot of privilege to have it so directly accessible to me, with two people who I would say kept it very much alive through action and like an energy, because both of them, in that sense, it was not something that fell in easily into their lap. Of course, as well, it comes with challenges. The daily discussions at home about dance and about music, and all agreements and disagreements. And it is something that is ongoing until today. In my late teens, I began to wonder what it actually means to say that what I'm doing is an ancient tradition. And I was very busy with trying to understand what is this ancient that we're talking about. And so I went into the history of the temple dances and the Devadasi, Sadir dance, the court dances. And I cannot say, I feel like it's still something, so many things that I'm wondering and are unclear to me, which is probably also because there is actually not much documented about this time, because it was a practice that was not meant to be documented. And so when I understood what actually happened and this lineage of Rukmani Devi, that that Bharatanatyam as it is known today is very much a reinvention of a temple dance, and that there's this history of the temple practices being abolished by the colonizers, and then the very specific figures in India reinventing this form. And then of course we have the different people, Rukmani Devi, Arundel, Bala Saraswati, and they were all doing it in a very different way, and coming also from a very different background and lineage. And I think that is very important to consider. And somehow for me, when I understood what happened in that time, it just didn't sit well with me anymore to stand on a stage and talk about an ancient tradition that is very much connected to violence, to loss, to unemployment, to misplacement, to discrimination, and very much a history that still hasn't really found justice. No, this is what I feel. And I needed to take a step back and also leave the stage setting, the setting of the elevated dancer in the spotlight and the separation of the spectator. This is something that I just stopped enjoying. And I'm going to say something that might sound a bit weird, but I was also really bored by this situation. And I was asking myself, what does it actually mean what we're doing here? And when, of course, especially in the diaspora, and I think especially in the Sri Lankan context, but I see this in India as well, there is this idea of conserving in a form that is ancient. And I think this mode of conservation has so much to do with an outer violence, and a violence that comes from outside, and this whole history of this being abolished. But I think in my work I try to rethink also the idea of conservation, because also, I mean, in a way, it is tricky to say that what we're doing is ancient, first of all. And secondly, on the one hand, there are traditions that, of course, have been the way they are and being passed on. And I think, in particular, indigenous knowledge and indigenous traditions and rituals belong to that category. But there are also traditions that very much are very fluent. They're not stagnant. They are fluid and changing and reinvented, and things are being added to it, things are being removed from it. And this is done by people. And so in my work, I am exploring these things, and it very often feels like a walk on a tightrope, understanding where can I allow myself as an artist to explore, because if an artistic practice is stagnant, then why actually do it as a practice? I cannot utter the same thing over and over again. And this is something that the choreographer Chandralekha has been dealing with, and these kind of questions she has been asking. And I think she's been doing a remarkable job in that. And I feel, even though Chandralekha comes from the Kalakshetra tradition and I come from the Adya Lakshman tradition, and there's a very big difference in what Kalakshetra has been doing, but I still feel similar questions, and some of questions that are being answered to me through Chandralekha's works, but also some questions that remain and they're not resolved. And it is also not really something to be resolved. It is something for me to experience and to live through and to embody and to share. And yes, I'm just looking at the time. Yeah. So I want to speak about more precisely about some of my works. So one crucial work was for me a work in complete darkness. I've shared actually this work at the Colombo dance platform, Shakti Colombo dance platform, where Vinuri Pereira invited me. And the reason I was doing a dance in complete darkness is because dance as an art form is in particular dealing with this question of representation and gaze, because we are very much dealing with what is closest to us, the body. And a lot of the modes and reasons of separating one from another, discriminating, and modes of kind of categorizing come from the gaze, come from representing one thing and not the other thing. And I think dance very much struggles with that still. And so there was a moment where I felt like I just want to switch off the light and see what happens. What happens if I dance in the dark? What happens if we listen to a dance rather than looking at a dance? What is that dance and what is that body? So it was a time where I was very much dealing with the questions of representation and the visual sense, and making it on a sensory level just a different experience of dance. And this was a beautiful journey for me because this work was born out of quite socio-political concerns, and it brought me back to a very poetic place. And this was something that was really a beautiful moment for me, because I work as an artist because I'm interested in the different ways art can use mediums to transmit something. And I think dance as an art form, especially in today's world where the body is more and more categorized and mechanized, categorized by nations and mechanized by a very modern capitalist system, I think dance really offers a way of being and moving through life that is not mechanized. And that in itself, without even putting a story on top, without putting a narration on top, that in itself is extremely empowering and extremely poetic and philosophical in my eyes. And so I'm very interested in asking these questions that I've been sharing, and seeing how can I not only embody them within a dance, but how can I somehow find a proposal that is not only insisting on the issue and on a problem. And that is very much something a moment where I go back to traditions and the knowledge that tradition carry. in particular because even though I studied contemporary dance, or let's say dance context and choreography, that is what the study program is called in Berlin. I've realized that I'm not a contemporary dancer because I don't come from a contemporary dance lineage, and so I think it is not necessary to come from a lineage to enter a tradition. But the questions I am asking to a single and a collective body are different already from the perspective of not coming from a lineage of Western dance and art. And so contemporary dance as a category that is very much owned by Western narratives, and I had a problem with that for a while, but while I have still a problem with the name contemporary dance as a category, I'm kind of okay with it like staying in the Western context in a way that it is posing questions that are directed towards a lineage of art, and that lineage. I think one of really important figures in that lineage are not only dancers and choreographers, but also performance artists who have also been really questioning this separation of spectator and dancer and witness, and really questioning this what that situation of a performance is. But in a way, even many of the things that performance art has been doing or is doing, or even experimental practices or even sound practices, noise and experimental music practices, we can see them in our traditions. And I think a beautiful thing about, and I say our traditions because I place myself in that lineage, is that there is a vast universe of so many things where everyone can find something for themselves. There's a vast variety of different practice, a vast variety of mythology, myths of very, very curious hybrids of beings. I mean, if we really look at what these gods and goddesses represent, and even on a physical level, like these kind of interspecies things, and I find it fascinating, and I think it's very important in a world where a sort of progressive ideas keeps pushing traditional knowledge into a corner, where I think that there is a lot of progressive ideas in traditions, and that it's not something that is completely contradicting. Another really important moment that I keep going back to is a moment where I've learned the Ashtabadi from my mother, and this is something that very much informs my body practice, my dance practice today, and it is something I've been dealing with for several years, and it's just something that I still cannot let go of. And I think that like I said, these are ongoing dialogues. And so the Ashtabadi, when I learned the Ashtabadi, I was around 13, 14. My mother has taught me that the way a mudra is used is not in a kind of rigid way, but the way mudra is used is in a way that is fluid. So if this is a tree, if this was a tree before, now this is a tree with an entire ecosystem. And this fluidity is something that I'm dealing with also in my current work very much, a fluidity in many different ways of thinking about the fluidity, an embodied fluidity. And so if I let this fluidity that I've learned through the Ashtabadi, if I let this really go into my joints, it really opens up a certain space, and you can feel it. When you're dancers, you can feel this opening up. And you can feel that whatever you're doing, it is not abstract. It is not only nirta. It in itself has already abhinaya. And this question of abhinaya and rasa is something that I've been fascinated with. I think in my works of the last 5 years, trying to understand what is rasa, as a person who is not so interested in direct storytelling with facial expression, and this moment of rasa that is an overall situation, where it is an emotive space where a dancer through dance, you get to that emotive space. And when you are there, it is a space where you share. It is a shared space. And I'm very, very interested in exploring rasa and fluidity that I've been learning in the Ashtabadi in different sensorial ways. And so this practice of listening that has been born out of this work in the dark I've been doing some years ago. It is becoming more clear to me that it is a whole practice of listening to dance, of listening more precisely and deeply, of exploring dance in various layers. Specifically on a sonic level. And the artist Salome Vöglin, who is a wonderful sound artist, she's been putting it very well in her book, where she's also writing about listening, that sound is something that becomes part of you, because it is literally movement and waves that as a listener it really becomes part of you, and it really hits an emotional spot in a way that things that we look at with our eyes can't quite do. And I think that a majority of people are lovers of music and have all their different tastes of music and music that is guiding them through their everyday life. And so I'm very interested in the sonic experience of dance, and I think this interest is probably deeper than I yet understand. And one of the things I think is also this loss of language for me. And I apologize, actually, I wanted to say this in the beginning, that I'm not able to speak in Tamil with you. It is very much something that is a pinch and a trauma in my family. It's very difficult to talk about it. I would love to be able to talk in Tamil, but in 80s and 90s Berlin, there was just so much pressure, especially as like a biracial person, and I really don't like this word, but just to like as a person who has two different backgrounds, it was very pressurizing to my family that I have these two different backgrounds, and there was a very specific request that German would be more dominant in my everyday life. Through the school of my mother and the friends around, I've had Tamil around, and it just needs always a kind of a closer proximity of people, of being around people for me, in order to kind of keep re-entering this language. But I think this loss of language is something that as much as has been and still is very sad to me, it has also been making it possible for me to be more focused on the language of sound and the different types of sound, and because it was my reference point more than language. Each hit of the mirdangam, each change of the violin, each the emotive world of music and each instrument is very much something that I had most of my attention to and most of my focus on. And I think that from early age on, in a way, I was listening very deeply to tones and sounds, because there was this lack of full access to language. Yeah. And another interest of mine to deal with the sonic part of dance is the fact that the dancer in many of the different dance traditions throughout South Asia is wearing an instrument, the salange. And I've always been a little bit sad that the salange are only worn for the performance, as of course an instrument that is looked at as sacred, but all instruments are, no? But for me it was always something that I wished I could have had more time with the salange, also in the studio, or also in the practice, and not only accumulating to the moment of a performance. And so for me this instrument of the salange is really telling me that dance and sound and dance and song is something that is going together, and that dance is somehow also, it's not only a visual experience, but it is also a sonic experience, and that it is something that has the sound itself is contributing to the moment of rasa, as something that, you know, sound travels and becomes resonates very strongly in a space. And I think this dual movement of a dancing body and the movement of sound traveling, I think that is extremely powerful. And this is something that I'm doing in my current work, which is an exploration of listening in various ways. So listening to dance itself as a sonic experience, mainly working with the salange as an instrument, but also listening to stories, to past histories, to lived on everyday narratives of people and body related to these traditions. And it's a quite an ongoing exploration in a way, but currently I'm trying to put it in a frame of a listening practice, and dance as a sonic experience. I will stop here. Thank you, Nandri, and yeah, have a wonderful day.